Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Quorum Podcast. This is where academic medicine meets remote, austere, and resource-limited areas.
Welcome back to the program. This is Aebhric O'Kelly. This week, we are joined by David Stanton, who is a search and rescue paramedic from Seattle. David, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So tell us a bit about yourself and what's keeping you busy.
So I've been in pre-hospital medicine for just under 20 years. 10 of that has been in special rescue, mostly U.S., domestic, and international. I was an honest firefighter paramedic for about 7 years before that. And then the last couple of years, I have moved over to academia and research, and am currently a research fellow at the University of Nottingham at the Center for Subversion, Unconventional Interventions, and Threats.
So we'll dive into each one of those. But I guess the first thing we'll talk about is your background in Seattle. So you were a King County you were a Medic 1 firefighter. And for those who are listening that don't understand how profound that is, can you describe the Medic 1 concept from Dr. Copeland and why you guys are seriously leading the world in out-of-hospital cardiac arrest?
Sure. So Medic 1 started in Seattle in the late 60s, kind of early 70s, with the idea being that you can train firefighters to perform advanced cardiac life support in the field, and therefore you will have better patient outcomes once they get to the hospital. The Medic 1 program has kind of extended to several other counties. And so I worked at Clallam County, Port Angeles Fire Department, Medic 1. The system, though, is kind of two-tiered. The first tier, and arguably the most important tier, is getting every layperson in the area CPR certified and AED certified. And it is not an exaggeration to say that we will arrive on scene of a witness cardiac arrest, and there will be a short line of people waiting to do CPR that are just passerbys before the first engine and medic unit arrives. The result is that we have some pretty astounding out-of-hospital ROSC rates, right around that 40% mark, which is pretty incredible. I think the big thing that, and especially with the medical directors that I've really been lucky enough to work with on the peninsula side, is that we are given as paramedics a lot of leeway, and we are far less protocol driven versus kind of clinical care driven. So we have a lot more agency to make decisions that in other systems might be restricted by what the protocol says. For us, the guidelines and the protocols are just those. That's the protocol to do. But if there are certain situations, and those come up fairly frequently, where a small deviation from the protocol is warranted for the best interest of the patient, that's something that decision is enabled by our medical directors for the paramedics to make. And there will always be lots of QA afterwards. There's lots of discussions with the receiving hospital. There's lots of discussions with our medical directors. The continuing education is constant and at a much higher level than other agencies that I've gotten to participate with. In general, it's a pretty cool system.
Medic 1 has shown that this is possible, to have a 40% out-of-hospital survival rate. Why is it that the rest of the world can't do what you guys do in Seattle?
Again, I think it really comes down to the idea that as soon as you have a out-of-hospital arrest, as soon as you can get onto the chest and start compressions, we're going to start extending that kind of patient timeline, that survivability. And so if everybody within a 100-meter radius of you knows CPR, the likelihood that one of them is going to step in, and again, there's a lot of public outreach and public health push to enable people to feel like they can step in to help. You buy that person the 4 or 5 minutes it's going to take for the ALS unit to arrive. And I think that's just a huge aspect of it. And it's as paramedics, I think we get a lot of credit. The hospitals get a ton of credit, but I think that the layperson who decides to step in and say, yes, I'm going to start pumping on this person's chest who I've never met before. Because I took a class 2 years ago, and I remember that the most important thing is to just keep doing compressions. I think that that's a I think that's a huge understated aspect of it. We also get to try things. I think that's another big thing as paramedics and as a pre-hospital system. We get to try things out. Is this going to work? Is elevating the head 10% actually going to make a difference? Okay, well, let's try that for a little bit. And then let's put some data together. Let's put some research together. It turns out it does. Then great, let's keep doing it. Or, oh, it turns out it doesn't. Okay, well, on to the next thing. And so I think kind of our innovation cycle tends to be a little bit shorter than the average, especially in the United States.
Cutting edge research and trying to find things that work, such as, hypothermia. Is there any research that King County Medic 1 is doing to cool the casualty, to get the casualty cold as you're doing resus?
So I'll be honest that I can't remember the specifics. I know that this was a big topic of discussion, 10 years ago or so, and especially like interfacing with our air critical care. I never participated personally in anything about that. I wasn't part of any study about that. I think the last study that I recall being a part of was having to get lactate numbers on every trauma patient, kind of a thing. But so you get a little lactate monitor, and every trauma patient you have to take 2 sets of lactate, kind of a thing, during your transport if possible, or at least get one. And then I don't know where that information really went up to.
Interesting. You said to elevate the head. That hasn't reached this side of the pond yet on maybe we should elevate the head. And we know from trauma and the JTS CPGs, everyone's head gets up to 30 degrees. It's just a lot of proof showing that that's a benefit, like TBIs and lowering ICP. But I never heard about elevating someone in cardiac arrest.
Yeah, that came out of like San Bernardino, maybe? Someplace in California started doing it. I think there's some research that suggests that there's a benefit. Again, I think that anytime you have any type of out of hospital, research methodology, it gets really muddy really quickly. I think the other aspect that at least I personally feel about medicine is that it is evolving all the time. And so there are things that, we would do when I first started, which we would never do now. The Northwest in particular has had a very, very strong aversion to backboarding patients forever. I think I was only working for a couple years as a baby EMT before they were like, all right, no more backboards for essentially anyone. We're just hurting these people. And then I work in some of the European systems, and they're like, we should backboard everyone. It's like, okay, if you'd like, go for it. So, I think that, again, if you work in a system that allows for the option culturally to be wrong, then you're going to have greater and earlier advances because you don't buy into something and get stuck with it forever. You can buy into it, and you can buy into it really well. And if it turns out it doesn't work, then you can disregard it. POCUS, I think, is a really good kind of idea of this, where it's like, everybody likes the idea of ultrasound in pre-hospital medicine. And there's, massive amounts of research to suggest that it's super appropriate in many situations. Is it appropriate in a out-of-hospital cardiac arrest where transport is 10 minutes away? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe reaching for the kind of the newest and greatest toy doesn't ever really turn off the idea that the thing that's going to help somebody who's in cardiac arrest is reversing the rhythm and keeping blood flow. We used to say all the time, and especially as a paramedic, I'd be telling all of my new EMTs and stuff like that, a really, really good ALS, really, really good out-of-hospital resuscitation is just really, really good BLS skills. And so even as a paramedic, even as a Medic 1 paramedic, the majority of skills that I would practice on a regular basis were all BLS skills, because those are the ones that are going to have the highest impact. And it's going to require kind of the least amount of tomfoolery and gadgets and stuff like that. And so much of my career has been in the austere world that, I'm not going to have an ISTAT. I'm not going to be able to know lab values for this patient. I'm not going to be able to, kind of turn on the critical care hat at all. I'm going to have whatever I, have on my plate carrier, whatever I, brought in my jump bag. And, 95% of that stuff is BLS. And so good BLS saves lives. ALS is cool, don't get me wrong, but good BLS saves lives. I would say that brings up a point that at least in the departments that I worked at, we had a very, very, very strong culture of raising up the skills of our EMTs and our BLS providers and pushing them into the leading edge. We were pushing the envelope for what BLS could do and should be able to do. And I think that is what makes a really, really good system. Because I worked with EMTs who were phenomenal. And if I had 2 patients at, a motor vehicle accident, I thought nothing of sending over an EMT to go manage what in every other instance would be an ALS patient initially, while I worked on another kind of, the greater triage priority. I trusted my EMTs implicitly. And the only way you get to do that is if you, as the kind of in the training hat, really get to push them and empower them to work to their fullest extent. And it's such a bummer that when I hear people like, oh, I'm an EMT so I can become a paramedic. In the Northwest, you have people who have been 30-year EMTs, and I would take them over a paramedic partner almost every day of the week.
I've seen the other end of that. I've been working in Seattle as a EMT. When I first got out of the Army in 2000, it was my first civilian job in Kent and South Seattle. And I was kind of surprised how much the King County Medic 1 paramedics turfed off some pretty advanced. I mean, yes, they're stable. They got maybe a vent and stuff. Like I'm a brand new EMT. I saw vents in the Army, and they would say, yeah, okay, well, go ahead and transport, and we're going to go back and service because that is not a cardiac patient. We need to focus on cardiac. And to be fair, I learned a lot from those guys.
Yeah. Yep. I have mixed feelings on that. Again, I was working in the same area as you as a brand new EMT, and then later as a paramedic. And it is a fine balance between empowering an EMT to take a patient that they're fully capable of taking, but are not confident in taking, versus what will happen, which is ALS providers will turf a patient in order to stay in service that should have gone ALS. And that's, hopefully what your QA system kind of catches, and you can and you can tweak that. When I was working in Port Angeles, if an EMT was ever truly uncomfortable taking a patient, not a problem. I'll take them. That's my job. My job is to take people to the hospital. That's perfectly fine. But I would always follow up with an EMT later and see what made it uncomfortable. Why was this uncomfortable? Is this a lack of training? If it's a lack of training, it's kind of my fault. Is it a lack of mentorship? In that case, it's also my fault. It's very, very rarely an unconfident EMT's fault that they are in an uncomfortable position. Usually that comes down to a training issue, and that should fall to the paramedics. That should fall to those above them, in my opinion.
There's discussion at the moment about getting rid of the EMTB and making everyone an advanced EMT. So should the American paramedic embrace this new concept that the EMTB goes away and every EMT is an advanced EMT, and therefore everyone is on some scale of the ALS?
Yeah, I think I support that to a certain degree. The state of Washington for a long time has a IV upgrade to the EMTs. So an EMT basic could show up and could start IVs, could run fluids, could manage, kind of all of that. And there wasn't any of the medication. There was no expanded medication. Rhode Island has an EMT cardiac, which is an EMT basic plus kind of the cardiac suite from the Advanced EMT curriculum. And I always thought that was kind of interesting. So here you have an EMTB who can start an IV and stuff like that and give fentanyl. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Hey, that seems to be working for them. And I don't even know if they still have this. This was pre-COVID, but I think that empowering EMTs, there's nothing wrong with empowering an EMT. And I also look to kind of to the military, where, does the military trust an 18-year-old, 68 whiskey to do IVs? Yeah. So why can't I train an 18-year-old EMT from Seattle to do an IV? I think that if the goal is to have quality patient care at every level, then we must empower everybody at every level to work to the fullest extent of their abilities. And continue to push that. There is a natural endpoint. I think paramedics doing REBOA in the field in Seattle is kind of crazy. There's no real reason to do that. But, other advanced providers in other parts of the world, yeah, that might be more realistic. The U.S. pre-hospital system is just so vast and varied. It will forever be kind of hyper-localized. I think the Pacific Northwest has a pretty good system for the places that they find themselves in, which is a mixture of urban and rural that are all geographically isolated from each other by mountains and water. So yeah, I think pushing your pre-hospital providers to be more advanced and to be more decision-making authorities is a huge benefit. Other cities, yeah, it might not work out as well because you don't need to. You got a lot more infrastructure readily available.
David, you just returned from a deployment in Ukraine. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this latest trip was pretty easy for me. I was the team lead for a MaxFax training that was delivered in Kyiv. It was actually Dr. Berger Longdana.
Oh, yes, he was a long-time friend.
Very. And so that was a wonderful trip. The MaxFax training in particular for Ukraine is basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to push out as much of kind of that initial surgical support for the jaw and face and airway as far forward as it can realistically be done, and getting to deliver that training and help out with that. And I do a fair amount of the kind of scenario writing was really wonderful. The feedback that we get is incredibly fast. Within 48 hours of the course being delivered, we were hearing from the providers that we had taught how they had been using their recently learned techniques. And the other great thing about this particular course is a lot of them are surgeons themselves. We even had a couple of MaxFax surgeons in the course, which was really great to give them a chance to both work with others to share what they have been doing and what they know in their knowledge base, and really be a kind of a collaborative educational approach for everybody who attended. I've been in and out of Ukraine for many years, and it's really shifted from a position of where those of us from NATO side with GWAT experience can go in and say, hey, this is what worked for us, and kind of deliver that information to the Ukrainians. And it's really shifted to now we're going and we're teaching them some things, but we're learning way more. They've had a lot more experience. I think the MaxFax course in particular was great because it turns into this collaborative experience of here's some ideas that we use, in the austere and wilderness and expedition world, our low resource background. What are you seeing in the low resource combat environment? And they're like, this is what, we see XYZ. And everybody can kind of come together and go, okay, so if we're seeing XYZ here and I have ABC skills from over here, how can we combine those? And you end up coming up with some really novel and interesting pieces of resuscitative technique. And then the fact that we get to hear from those in our course within a week, we're getting text messages and we're getting case updates and stuff from their own patients. That's really amazing. It allows us to every single course that we teach, whether it be MaxFax, whether it be prolonged casualty care, is really, it changes every single time based on the rapidly changing kind of combat and combat medicine developments that take place in Ukraine.
As a Green Beret, I've been to many countries teaching. This is what we do. We're force multipliers. We teach. And every time I go to Ukraine, there's just no comparison on the eagerness, the drive, the motivation. I have never seen any other country push so hard and so heavily for excellence under duress. This is insane. The amount of learning that they've done in 4 years. No, scratch that, 14 years. And how they've benefited everyone from what they're learning on the front line.
Yeah, and it extends even just beyond your kind of point of injury and role 1, role 2, role 3 care providers. We were teaching this course at one of the medical universities in Kyiv, and the simulation lab for that university is probably the best simulation lab that I've ever seen. And the way that they use 3D printers is astounding. And it is all brand new technology and techniques that they are developing So they make their own skin analogs, for setting up IVs or that you can place over a skeleton to, practice using a scalpel to go for a finger thoracostomy, et cetera, et cetera. So you have these skin analogs, and this 3D print lab can make like 6 different versions of skin. So if you want to practice suturing on a face, it's going to feel different than on an abdomen, which is going to feel different than on a hand. And they can create a skin analog for each of those anatomical locations. And that's just super cool. And it's completely out of necessity. They have to be able to train their people quickly. They have to be able to train their people effectively before putting them into, a position where they're going to be working constantly in super high pressure situations. And it's a whole of society push. And it's really pretty amazing to get to witness that. And again, I've been there many times since long before the main Russian invasion in 22. And just to see the change that they've gone through in the last 10 years has been really astounding. It's a privilege to get to go and work with them.
We have a lot to learn from their experience and from what they're doing on the front lines.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
David, you are also part of the University of Nottingham's medical school, and you spend quite a bit of time in the UK. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I do 2 things. I have 2 hats at the University of Nottingham. I do teach at the medical school. I teach wilderness and austere medicine to 4th-year medical students, which is kind of a introductory, a month-long like wilderness EMT program, basically, which is super fun. And then I'm also attached to the Center for Subversion, Unconventional Interventions and Threats, which is in the School of Politics and International Relations. And I study medical intelligence while there. And it's the Suits Center is a super interesting, very diverse group. We have everybody from Professor Dan Lomas, who does your kind of general intelligence studies, looking at MI5, looking at MI6. We have Rory Cormack, who is a covert action specialist. If you ever want to plan or instigate a coup, you should talk to him. Andrew Mumford is our kind of our war studies, and he does a lot of work on like insurgencies and stuff like that. So it's a really interesting, very diverse group, and I've managed to find a little niche and taking some of my medical skills and applying it to the intelligence world.
Nice. And you have a few articles submitted to JSOM as well. What is your current research? What are you doing to push evidence forward?
So I am working on 2 tracks right now. The main track at Suits is going to be looking at medical intelligence and arguing for it to be seen less as a kind of subsidiary, almost logistical function of intelligence, and that it is a function of intelligence in its own right. Medicine and medical and health information can tell a decision maker a vast quantity of things that the average person might not initially think of. And it's challenging because the intelligence world and the medicine world rarely talk to each other. Generally speaking, you're in one or the other. An example of this would be, so in the build up to the invasion of a country, usually in the days leading up to the invasion, the invader will move blood supplies to the front because they are anticipating casualties. And so that's pretty well established in kind of the intelligence literature. Bad guy moving blood forward means that they think that they're going to need blood. The medical intelligence side asks, well, how much blood do they have? Because we can calculate how many casualties they think that they're going to take by how much blood they're moving forward. And so if that number is super low, well, why is it super low? Are they very confident? Are they less prepared than we think that they are? And so in particular, in the build-up to the Russian invasion in 2022, we did see them move blood supplies. But my question is, again, how much? We all know on the medical side how many units of blood we need for a trauma resuscitation. But do the intelligence analysts know that? If you tell them, then they can say, well, Russia isn't moving very much blood, actually. They are moving blood, but it's not enough to support their main advance. So are they ill-prepared logistically? Do they think it's going to be a cakewalk? All of those are pieces of information that directly contribute to the ability for a person to make a good decision. And that's what intelligence is there to do. Intelligence is there to provide decision makers with a competitive advantage. The other track that I take is looking at prolonged casualty care. And I've been in the austere and wilderness medicine world for essentially my entire career. My original EMT was taught by Knowles as a wilderness EMT because I wanted to do ski patrol. Yep. And so recently, though, at a course that we were teaching in England for prolonged casualty care, the majority of the students all had a either austere and wilderness or military background. It was about half and half. And everybody had been a provider for at least 4 or 5 years. Many people had worked in austere or in military conflict situations or in humanitarian situations. And so one of the things that I found most interesting about this is everybody knew prolonged field care from a protocol perspective. Everybody knew, how are we pushing TXA today? Everybody was up to date on the TCCC, guidelines and the TCCC update. Everybody was well versed in the JTS. Everybody could pull out, their Hitman little cheat sheets that they would carry with them. But what seemed to be missing was a conceptualization of why these things were needed. And we all know the definition of PFC, kind of the classic one, which is or whatever, I can't remember exactly. It's in a place you don't want to be, with a patient you don't want to have, with fewer resources than you wish you would have for longer than you want. Something like that.
Sean Keenan. Yeah.
It's a Sean Keenan, right? And so that got me thinking of like, okay, well, how do we? Is there anything that conceptualizes prolonged field care? And I prefer the term prolonged casualty care personally.
We won't get into that conflict by any means. Yeah.
And so I started looking for kind of literature on. And the vast majority of literature out there is on technique. And you can find conceptual issues in case study reports and stuff like that. But there hadn't been from everything that I could find, a really detailed kind of social science look at, well, what exactly is the problem that all of these protocols are attempting to resolve? And how do you use the protocols in a situation that is going to change while still being severely constrained? And so the series, it's currently under peer review right now.
Awesome.
And Jason's been great to work with. And basically, all of prolonged field care can be described as a discipline of constraint. And there are multiple constraints that occur. So you have various domains of the constraint, and that could be equipment, that could be location, that could be evacuation. We are constrained by what we can carry. We are constrained by the fact that we are at 14,000 feet. We are constrained by the fact that evacuation is not going to be able to come by air to the 14,000 foot peak that we are at. We are going to have to get a ATV up there, and that is going to take 24 hours. All of these aspects of constraint can be identified, studied, and in the future kind of pointed back to in order to mitigate the next provider's situation. And it's taken a while, prolonged field care being around since 2014, 2015, as it's kind of its own discipline. It takes some time to build up a body of casework. But we start to see now that we have a large body of casework, and we have even more coming out of Ukraine, and Ukraine is doing a very good job of providing or of having a lot of data that you can look to and kind of mine. You have constraints in terms of like capability design. So like the main tension in capability design is like your density of being able to provide care. If I have a vent, cool, I can provide really high level care, but I'm going to be less mobile. I'm going to have a larger signature, and I'm not going to be able to sustain that vent forever. You have constraints of trajectory management. So, clinicians have to balance kind of physiological optimization against sustainability. I have pressors. I can use these pressors now, but if I'm going to be sitting on this patient for the next 48 hours, do I want to expend all of that right now, or do I want to wait? And so trajectory management. Tempo and uncertainty. How fast do I want to work right now when I think I'm going to be out of here in the next few hours versus, hey, turns out our first window for evac is gone. Our next window, sometime in the next 36 hours. Okay, well, the tempo of my treatment has to change.
So you were at the Vigorous Warrior exercise through NATO.
Yeah.
And you tell us about that. How was your experience with that exercise?
Super interesting. At Vigorous Warrior, it was awesome to be there. Me and a team from the World Extreme Medicine Fund were delivering prolonged casualty care workshops to 31 different member countries. Super cool to do. What was really excellent and awesome was to see that at the ground level, so your stabilization point, your point of injury, your role one, which is most of the places that I hung out in, from all of these different countries, every ground provider realizes that the game has changed because of Ukraine. Everybody realizes that the golden hour is no longer viable. And so they are hungry. They are hungry for everything that they can get their hands on when it comes to prolonged casualty care. And that was just super great to see. One of the British groups was looking at kind of innovative approaches for ground evacuation between stabilization and role one. The various role one units were looking at how can we make the equipment that we are issued sustain us longer. It was very interesting. Spread across most of Estonia, it felt. We drove a lot.
So, David, my final question for you is this. What advice do you have for the new medic, the new nurse, the new doc who's just starting out in their career in austere medicine?
You cannot ever lose sight that the foundational aspects of medicine are what are going to best serve your patient. If you have the opportunity to practice some super cool skill that's, high impact, low priority, great, do that, but spend only 20% of your time on that. We need to spend more time on the basics, everything that is foundational to your craft. And austere medicine is a craft, it is a discipline. If you focus on the basics, all of the rest of it is going to come much easier. And if you are never sure of what to do, you can always fall back on that. So that is my advice to everybody who's getting into the austere, the remote space, is it does not matter the level of skill that you are at now. Go back and do the basics.
I'm going to tie that into our first conversation that we had about Medic 1 in Seattle. And you said there as well, the basics, the ability to get hands on a chest for bystander CPR makes the difference.
Absolutely. Good ALS is great BLS. And that is a mantra that I will forever, I will die on that hill.
David, thanks for joining us today. It was fantastic to learn about your work in the world, and I look forward to seeing what you could do next.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time.
This has been a presentation from the College of Remote and Offshore Medicine. If you would like to earn CPD credits for this podcast, you can join the Council of Members. Being a member of the college gives you free CPD credit, free access to our virtual field guide, and discounts on our e-learning courses. You can join the team on our college website at quorum.edu.mt.